Your grandmother's kitchen held secrets that today's celebrity chefs would kill for. While we chase expensive superfoods and complicated cooking techniques, an entire generation of brilliant home cooks stretched every dollar and fed their families with creativity, love, and ingredients that cost less than your morning coffee. These 25 forgotten recipes from the 1970s you need to eat in your lifetime. Mock apple pie. When apples were expensive and crackers were cheap, clever cooks discovered that Ritz crackers soaked in a cinnamon sugar syrup could fool anyone into thinking they were eating apple pie. This brilliant deception became a household staple during tough times, proving that imagination could triumph over empty wallets. The magic happened in the chemistry between buttery crackers and the sweet, spiced syrup that transformed their texture into something remarkably apple-like. Families would gather around the dinner table, completely convinced they were enjoying a slice of traditional apple pie, never knowing they were actually eating a masterpiece of culinary illusion. What made this recipe special wasn't just its affordability, but how it brought families together around a shared secret. Kids would help crack the crackers, mothers would carefully measure the syrup, and everyone would wait in anticipation to see if the trick would work again. This wasn't just about saving money, it was about creating magic from ordinary ingredients. Ham and bean soup. When the holiday ham bone sat in the refrigerator like a reproachful reminder of excess, wise cooks knew exactly what to do. Ham and bean soup was the ultimate redemption story, turning that leftover bone into liquid gold. Navy beans, soaked overnight and simmered slowly with the ham bone, created a soup so rich and satisfying that it could carry a family through the leanest of times. The process was almost ritualistic. The beans would bubble away on the back burner while life happened around them. Onions, carrots, and celery joined the party, along with bay leaves and whatever herbs were available. By evening, the house would smell like heaven, and the soup would be thick enough to stick to your ribs. It was the kind of meal that made children understand why their parents kept talking about the good old days. Fried green tomatoes. When tomato plants produced more green tomatoes than could ripen, clever cooks discovered that these unripe fruits could be transformed into a delicious side dish. Sliced green tomatoes were coated in cornmeal and fried until golden, creating a crispy exterior that contrasted beautifully with the tart, firm interior. The key to perfect fried green tomatoes was in the preparation. The tomatoes needed to be sliced thick enough to hold their shape, but thin enough to cook through. The cornmeal coating provided texture and flavor, while the frying process caramelized the tomatoes just enough to balance their natural tartness. Families would serve them as a side dish with dinner or as a snack. What made fried green tomatoes special was how they turned what might have been waste into something absolutely delicious. The contrast between the crispy coating and the tangy tomato inside created a unique flavor and texture combination that became addictive. The dish reminded families that good food could come from making the most of what they had, even if it wasn't what they originally planned. Beans and franks. This dish elevated the humble hot dog into something approaching sophistication. Baked beans enhanced with brown sugar, mustard, and chunks of hot dogs, slow cooked until the flavors melded into sweet and savory harmony. The hot dogs added protein and substance, while the beans provided fiber and comfort. Cooked in a heavy pot or slow cooker, this meal filled the house with aromas that promised satisfaction. The beans would become creamy and rich, while the hot dogs absorbed all the sweet and tangy flavors of the sauce. Served with cornbread or crusty rolls, this meal proved that campfire food could work just as well in the family kitchen. Milk toast. This simple comfort food consisted of toasted bread soaked in warm, seasoned milk, creating a soft, nurturing dish that was perfect for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. While it might sound bland to modern palates, families knew how to season it with butter, salt, pepper, and sometimes a sprinkle of cinnamon or sugar to make it delicious. The beauty of milk toast was in its versatility and digestibility. It was perfect for children, elderly family members, or anyone recovering from illness. The warm milk softened the bread to a pudding-like consistency, while the seasonings provided comfort and flavor. Many families had their own secret variations, adding vanilla, nutmeg, or even a touch of honey. What made milk toast special was how it represented care and nurturing. Mothers would prepare it for sick children or family members who needed something gentle and comforting. The dish became associated with love and attention, a way to show care through the simplest possible means. It reminded families that the best comfort food didn't need to be complicated. It just needed to be made with love. Beef Stroganoff. This Russian-inspired dish became an American sensation in the 1970s, proving that international cuisine could be both accessible and affordable. Strips of beef, usually the less expensive cuts, were cooked with mushrooms and onions in a creamy sauce made rich with sour cream. The key was cooking the beef quickly to keep it tender, then letting the sauce do the heavy lifting. Served over wide egg noodles, beef stroganoff was elegant enough for company, but simple enough for a Tuesday night. The dish taught home cooks that they could create restaurant-quality meals in their own kitchens. The creamy sauce, with its tangy finish from the sour cream, elevated humble ingredients into something that felt luxurious. It was the kind of meal that made husbands brag about their wives' cooking to their coworkers. Wacky cake. Depression-era bakers discovered that you could make a delicious chocolate cake without eggs, butter, or milk, ingredients that were either too expensive or simply unavailable. Using just flour, sugar, cocoa powder, baking soda, salt, water, oil, and vinegar, this cake proved that constraints could spark incredible creativity. The secret ingredient was the chemical reaction between the vinegar and baking soda, which created the perfect rise and texture that eggs would normally provide. Families would mix this cake directly in the baking pan, making cleanup a breeze and ensuring that even the youngest family members could help with the preparation. What made Wacky cake truly special was how it democratized dessert. When other families couldn't afford to bake, this recipe ensured that everyone could enjoy a homemade cake. The chocolate flavor was rich and satisfying, and many people claimed it tasted better than expensive cakes made with premium ingredients. It became a symbol of resilience, showing that sweetness could emerge from the simplest combinations. Skillet cornbread. Before expensive baking pans and fancy ingredients, families made cornbread in cast-iron skillets using cornmeal, flour, milk, eggs, and a bit of bacon grease. The hot skillet created a perfectly crispy crust while keeping the inside tender and fluffy. This cornbread was substantial enough to serve as a complete meal with just a pat of butter. The secret to great skillet cornbread was heating the bacon grease in the skillet before adding the batter, creating that signature sizzle and ensuring a golden, crispy bottom crust. Families would serve it hot from the skillet, cutting it into wedges and serving it alongside soup, stew, or just with butter and honey. What made this cornbread memorable was how it turned a simple grain into something that could anchor an entire meal. The combination of the crispy exterior and tender interior, along with the rich flavor from the bacon grease, created a bread that was satisfying and delicious. It proved that with the right technique, even the most basic ingredients could become something extraordinary. Redeye gravy. Southern cooks discovered that the drippings from country ham combined with coffee could create a unique gravy that was both flavorful and economical. This thin, reddish-brown gravy was served over biscuits or grits, providing a hearty breakfast that could fuel a family through a long day of work. The secret was using strong, black coffee and the right ratio of ham drippings to create a gravy that was neither too thick nor too thin. The coffee added a slight bitterness that balanced the saltiness of the ham, while the drippings provided richness and flavor. Families would serve it alongside eggs and biscuits for a complete breakfast. What made Redeye gravy special was how it transformed what might have been discarded, the pan drippings from cooking ham, into an essential part of the meal. The combination of coffee and ham created a unique flavor that was distinctly Southern and completely satisfying. It demonstrated how resourceful cooks could create something special from ingredients that others might overlook. Hobo Stew. Train-hopping wanderers during the Great Depression created this one-pot wonder using whatever ingredients they could find. The basic recipe combined ground beef, potatoes, carrots, onions, and canned tomatoes. But the beauty was in its flexibility. You could add whatever vegetables or leftovers you had on hand. The stew got its name from the transient workers who would gather around campfires, each contributing something to the communal pot. This sharing spirit made the meal more than just sustenance. It was about community, generosity, and making something beautiful from scraps. The long, slow cooking process allowed all the flavors to meld together into something greater than the sum of its parts. Families adopted this recipe because it could feed a crowd for very little money, and it actually improved with reheating. Mothers would make a big batch on Sunday and serve it throughout the week, each day adding different seasonings or vegetables to keep it interesting. The flexibility of Hobo Stew meant that no two pots were ever exactly alike, making every meal a small adventure. King Ranch Chicken. Down in Texas, this dish earned its royal title not through fancy ingredients, but through sheer practicality. Named after the legendary King Ranch, this layered casserole turned leftover chicken into a crown jewel of comfort food. Housewives would combine shredded chicken with cream of mushroom soup, diced tomatoes with green chilies, and layer it between corn tortillas and cheese. The magic happened in the oven, where these humble ingredients transformed into something that could make a cowboy weep with joy. The beauty of King Ranch chicken lay in its forgiving nature. No two families made it exactly the same way. Some added bell peppers, others threw in whatever vegetables were lurking in the crisper drawer. The dish became a neighborhood legend because it could stretch to feed unexpected dinner guests and still taste like you'd planned it all along. Today's food bloggers would call it rustic and charge extra for it. Biscuits and gravy. Southern families perfected this hearty breakfast dish that combined fluffy, buttery biscuits with rich sausage gravy. The gravy was made from sausage drippings, flour, and milk, creating a thick, creamy sauce that was both filling and flavorful. This combination provided enough protein and calories to fuel a family through a morning of hard work. The art was in making both components perfectly: biscuits that were light and fluffy, and gravy that was smooth and well-seasoned. The sausage provided flavor and richness to the gravy, while the milk created the creamy texture. Families would serve this for breakfast, but it was substantial enough to be dinner when times were tough. What made biscuits and gravy special was how it represented true comfort food, something that was both satisfying and affordable. The combination of carbohydrates, protein, and fat provided lasting energy, while the rich flavors made it feel like a treat rather than just sustenance. It became a symbol of Southern hospitality and home cooking. Corned beef hash. Sunday's leftover corned beef found new life in Monday's breakfast skillet. Diced potatoes, usually cooked until they developed a golden crust, mixed with chunks of corned beef, created a hearty meal that could fuel hard-working people through long days. The key was getting the potatoes crispy on the bottom while keeping them tender throughout. Smart cooks would add diced onions for sweetness and maybe a bell pepper for color. The hash would sizzle and pop in the cast-iron skillet, developing those crispy edges that made each bite a perfect combination of textures. Topped with a fried egg, this dish transformed breakfast into something substantial enough to be called dinner. It was the kind of meal that reminded people why simple cooking was often the best cooking. Deviled ham sandwiches. When lunch needed to be quick but satisfying, deviled ham came to the rescue. Canned ham, mixed with mayonnaise, mustard, and sweet pickle relish, spread between slices of soft white bread, created a sandwich that was both nostalgic and practical. The key was getting the seasoning just right. Enough mustard for tang, enough mayo for creaminess, and just the right amount of relish for sweetness. These sandwiches were perfect for school lunches, afternoon snacks, or light dinners paired with a bowl of soup. The mixture could be made ahead and kept in the refrigerator, ready to create quick meals whenever hunger struck. It was the kind of simple food that reminded people that satisfaction didn't always require complexity. Grilled cheese and tomato soup. This pairing became iconic for good reason. The combination of crispy, buttery sandwich and smooth, creamy soup created perfect comfort food harmony. The key to great grilled cheese was using real butter and cooking it slowly so the cheese melted completely while the bread developed a golden crust. The tomato soup, whether homemade or from a can, provided the perfect acidic counterpoint to the rich sandwich. The ritual of dunking the sandwich into the soup created those perfect moments of childhood bliss that adults still crave. The contrast of temperatures and textures, hot, crispy bread against cool, smooth soup, made every bite a small celebration. It was the kind of meal that could cure whatever ailed you, from bad weather to bad days. Salmon croquettes. Canned salmon found its finest expression in these golden, crispy patties that transformed simple ingredients into something elegant. Mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings, then formed into patties and pan-fried until golden, these croquettes proved that convenience foods could create memorable meals. The key was not overmixing the ingredients, which would make the croquettes tough. Served with white sauce or simply with lemon wedges, salmon croquettes were sophisticated enough for company, but easy enough for weeknight dinners. The crispy exterior gave way to a tender, flaky interior that was packed with salmon flavor. These taught home cooks that presentation mattered. Even simple ingredients could look and taste elegant with the right technique. Johnny Marzetti. This Midwestern casserole combined ground beef, egg noodles, and cheese sauce into something that could feed a crowd without breaking the bank. Named after a Columbus restaurant owner, this dish became a potluck favorite because it traveled well and everyone loved it. The combination of tender noodles, savory meat, and creamy cheese created comfort food that satisfied on every level. The beauty of Johnny Marzetti was its flexibility. You could add vegetables, change the seasonings, or use different cheeses based on what was available. It was the kind of dish that used whatever was in the pantry and still turned out delicious. Families would request it for special occasions because it felt celebratory while still being economical. Pimento cheese sandwiches. The South's contribution to sandwich perfection, pimento cheese combined sharp cheddar, cream cheese, mayonnaise, and diced pimentos into something that was greater than the sum of its parts. Spread between slices of soft white bread, this sandwich was both elegant and accessible. The key was getting the cheese mixture to the right consistency, smooth enough to spread, but chunky enough to have texture. These sandwiches were perfect for lunchboxes, afternoon snacks, or light dinners. The combination of sharp and creamy flavors with the sweet pop of pimentos created something that was simultaneously sophisticated and comforting. It was the kind of food that reminded people that the best things in life were often the simplest. Succotash. This Native American-inspired dish combined corn and lima beans into a simple, nutritious side dish that was both filling and affordable. The two ingredients complemented each other perfectly, with the sweetness of the corn balancing the earthiness of the beans, while both together provided complete protein. The beauty of succotash was in its flexibility. Families could use fresh, frozen, or canned vegetables depending on what was available and affordable. Some added bacon or ham for extra flavor, while others kept it simple with just butter and seasonings. The dish could be served as a side or made into a complete meal with the addition of meat or eggs. What made succotash special was how it demonstrated the wisdom of traditional food combinations. The corn and beans together provided better nutrition than either would alone, while the simple preparation allowed the natural flavors of the vegetables to shine. It became a staple for families who needed something that was both economical and nourishing. Tater tot hot dish. Minnesota's gift to the culinary world, this casserole embodied everything great about 1970s cooking. It was easy, economical, and absolutely delicious. Ground beef was browned with onions, mixed with cream of mushroom soup and frozen mixed vegetables, then topped with a crown of tater tots that baked to golden perfection. The result was a dish that could silence a table full of hungry people in minutes. What made tater tot hot dish special was its ability to unite families around the dinner table. Kids loved the crispy tots on top, adults appreciated the hearty filling underneath, and everyone went back for seconds. It was the kind of dish that traveled well to potluck dinners and church suppers, always returning home in an empty dish. The beauty was in its simplicity, no fancy techniques required, just honest ingredients combined with a mother's love. Chicken and dumplings. This dish was pure comfort in a bowl, the kind of meal that could heal both body and soul. Whole chickens, simmered until they fell off the bone, created a rich broth that served as the foundation for fluffy dumplings that were like clouds floating in liquid heaven. The process couldn't be rushed. The chicken needed time to give up all its goodness to the broth. The dumplings themselves were simple, just flour, baking powder, salt, and milk, mixed into a soft dough and dropped by spoonfuls into the simmering broth. They would puff up like little pillows, absorbing the chicken flavor while adding their own comforting texture. The final dish was more than the sum of its parts, creating something that could chase away the blues and fill empty bellies with warmth that lasted for hours. Fish sticks and mac and cheese. This combination might sound like a child's fantasy, but in the 1970s, it represented practical cooking at its finest. Frozen fish sticks, baked until golden and crispy, paired with homemade macaroni and cheese, created a meal that satisfied both nutritional needs and budget constraints. The key was making the mac and cheese from scratch with real cheese and a proper white sauce. The contrast of textures made this meal special. The crispy fish sticks against the creamy, cheesy pasta created a combination that kept everyone happy. Kids loved the familiar flavors, while adults appreciated the economy and nutrition. Served with frozen peas or green beans, this meal proved that convenience foods could be part of a loving, home-cooked dinner when used thoughtfully. Baked ziti. This Italian-American casserole became a weeknight hero for busy families. Ziti pasta, mixed with ricotta cheese, marinara sauce, and mozzarella, then baked until bubbly and golden, created a dish that was both satisfying and economical. The beauty was in its make-ahead nature. You could assemble it in the morning and just pop it in the oven when you got home. The combination of textures made every bite interesting. The tender pasta, creamy ricotta, tangy tomato sauce, and stretchy mozzarella created layers of flavor that made this dish feel like a celebration. Families would gather around the table as the cheese stretched from fork to mouth, creating those picture-perfect moments that food photographers try to capture today. Dandelion salad. Before grocery stores made every green available year-round, families foraged for dandelion greens in their own backyards. These bitter, nutritious leaves were completely free and packed with vitamins that expensive lettuce couldn't match. Smart cooks learned to balance the bitterness with bacon grease, vinegar, and a touch of sugar. The key to great dandelion salad was timing. Young leaves picked in early spring before the flowers bloomed were tender and less bitter. Families would make an event of gathering the greens together, teaching children which leaves to pick and how to identify the best plants. This recipe connected families to their food in a way that modern supermarket shopping never could. What made this dish remarkable was how it transformed what most people considered a weed into a delicious and nutritious meal. The warm bacon dressing wilted the greens just enough to tame their bite, while the vinegar added brightness that made the whole dish come alive. Dandelion salad reminded people that good food could be found anywhere, even in their own backyards. Pot roast with vegetables. The Sunday pot roast was more than a meal. It was a weekly ritual that brought families together. A tough, inexpensive cut of beef was transformed through slow cooking into something so tender you could cut it with a fork. Surrounded by potatoes, carrots, and onions that had absorbed all the meat's flavors, this dish was the definition of comfort food. The secret was time and patience. The roast would go into a heavy pot with just enough liquid to create steam, then cook slowly until it surrendered completely. The vegetables added during the last hour would emerge as perfectly tender companions to the meat. The gravy made from the pan drippings tied everything together into a meal that made everyone understand why Sunday dinner was sacred. Corn chowder. When corn was cheap and plentiful, smart cooks knew how to turn it into liquid gold. Corn chowder, with its creamy base enhanced by chunks of potato and crispy bacon, created a soup that was both hearty and elegant. The key was cooking the corn long enough to release its natural sweetness into the broth, creating layers of flavor that developed with each spoonful. Made with fresh corn cut from the cob, or even frozen corn when fresh wasn't available, this soup proved that simple ingredients could create complex satisfaction. The bacon added smokiness and richness, while the potatoes provided substance and helped thicken the soup naturally. It was the kind of meal that made corn feel like a luxury ingredient. Potato candy. When store-bought candy was too expensive, creative cooks turned to potatoes to make a sweet treat that rivaled anything from the candy store. This unusual confection combined mashed potatoes with powdered sugar and peanut butter, creating a fudge-like candy that was both satisfying and affordable. The secret was using well-drained, perfectly smooth mashed potatoes that would disappear into the candy, leaving only sweetness and texture behind. Families would gather in the kitchen to roll out the candy, spread it with peanut butter, and cut it into squares. The process became a family activity that created memories along with the treats. What made potato candy special was how it challenged everyone's expectations. People would take a bite expecting something ordinary and instead discover a rich, creamy confection that tasted like expensive fudge. The recipe proved that with a little creativity, even the most humble ingredients could become something magical and delicious that brought joy to the whole family. Egg drop soup. Long before it became a Chinese restaurant staple, resourceful home cooks discovered they could create a satisfying soup using just broth, eggs, and a few simple seasonings. The technique of slowly drizzling beaten eggs into hot broth created beautiful, silky ribbons that transformed a simple soup into something elegant and filling. The key was in the timing and temperature. The broth had to be hot enough to cook the eggs instantly, but not so hot that they scrambled. Families would add whatever vegetables or seasonings they had on hand, making each pot unique. Some added scallions, others used herbs from their garden, and many finished it with a splash of vinegar or soy sauce. What made egg drop soup special was how it demonstrated that restaurant-quality dishes could be made at home with ingredients that cost almost nothing. The protein from the eggs made it surprisingly filling, while the warm broth provided comfort and satisfaction. It became a go-to meal for families who needed something quick, nutritious, and economical. Bologna gravy on toast. When meat was scarce, families made do with what they could afford. Bologna, cheaper than most meats, became the star of this filling meal. Sliced bologna fried in a pan until the edges curled up, then flour sprinkled over it to create a roux. Water added slowly turned it into a thick gravy that covered several slices of homemade bread. The salty, meaty flavor satisfied hungry mouths at a fraction of the cost of a regular meat dinner. Many grandparents still make this today, not from necessity, but from nostalgia. The sound of bologna sizzling in the pan would bring children running to the kitchen, knowing this special treat was in the works. Families often bought bologna in thick rings rather than pre-sliced, cutting off only what was needed for each meal to prevent waste. Some clever cooks saved the paper separating each slice and used it to grease pans for other cooking, extracting every bit of value from their purchase. Hungarian chicken paprikash. Bold, comforting, and built on just a handful of ingredients that transformed into something far greater than their sum. Starting with bone-in chicken pieces, browned until skin crisped, filling the kitchen with mouth-watering aroma. Thinly sliced onions sautéed to golden perfection created the foundation for the star ingredient. Generous handfuls of paprika that turned everything deep red and earthy. Some added garlic for extra depth, others kept it simple. A touch of flour thickened the sauce before water or broth loosened it to perfect consistency. Just before serving, rich sour cream swirled and created velvety, luxurious texture that coated every bite. Typically served over wide egg noodles, perfectly designed for soaking up every drop of the magnificent sauce. Some garnished with parsley for freshness. Most let the dish's inherent flavors shine unadorned. This wasn't about presentation, but about delivering deep, smoky, tangy heartiness that satisfied completely. It fed families, warmed bellies, and created lasting food memories long after plates were cleaned. Bean sandwiches. Protein came cheap in the form of beans. Leftover beans from dinner mashed with a fork, spread on bread, and seasoned with whatever was available. Maybe a dash of vinegar, salt and pepper, or hot sauce for those who grew peppers. The sandwich provided protein and energy for workers heading to factories or fields. Variations included adding a small amount of onion, or rarely, a slice of cheese when dairy wasn't too expensive. The beans were often soaked overnight and cooked in large batches on weekends, providing a foundation for multiple meals throughout the week. Lunch pails carried to work sites would contain these hearty sandwiches wrapped in newspaper or wax paper, saved from previous purchases. The filling nature of beans meant workers could make it through long shifts of physical labor without hunger distracting from their tasks, a practical consideration that outweighed concerns about taste or variety. Breaded veal cutlets. Thin, crispy, and golden, quick to cook, quick to please. You took an inexpensive veal slice, dipped it sequentially in flour, egg, then breadcrumbs, and gently placed it in a hot skillet. The satisfying sizzle announced the beginning of culinary magic as the crust formed rapidly while the meat inside remained tender. Though not thick or particularly juicy, these cutlets delivered delightful crunch, remarkable flavor, and unexpected elegance, especially when payday remained distant. The breadcrumb coating absorbed seasonings beautifully, making each bite taste like dedicated effort, despite the quick preparation. Alongside, a perfect scoop of instant mashed potatoes, creamy, fluffy, and steaming hot, with golden butter melting enticingly on top, completed the meal. Sometimes gravy appeared, sometimes not, but the cutlets stood proudly either way. For families balancing time constraints, financial limitations, and hungry mouths, this dinner consistently delivered satisfaction and contentment. The contrast between crisp exterior and tender center created textural perfection that elevated this simple dish to mealtime favorite. Spaghetti with butter. When meat for sauce wasn't affordable, pasta still filled hungry stomachs. Cooked spaghetti tossed with a small amount of butter or margarine, perhaps a sprinkle of salt, or, if available, a bit of grated cheese. This simple meal could feed a family for pennies while providing needed carbohydrates for energy. Children twirled the long noodles around forks, making a game of a dinner that parents knew was born of necessity. Mothers would often save butter from morning toast, scraping leftover bits into a special container reserved for pasta night. The cooking water from the pasta was sometimes saved and used as the base for next day's soup, extracting every bit of starch and flavor from the ingredients. In some households, this simple dish was elevated to company food by serving it on the good dishes with a sprinkling of parsley from the windowsill herb pot, demonstrating how presentation could transform even the humblest meal into something special. Salisbury steak. The closest many families ever got to steak, and nobody complained. Ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, eggs, salt, pepper, and perhaps a dash of Worcestershire sauce for depth created the foundation. Shaped into oval patties and flattened just enough to sear perfectly in a hot skillet, they developed beautiful browning on both sides before being set aside for the real star, mushroom gravy. Sliced mushrooms sautéed with onions, then dusted with flour to capture flavorful drippings. Broth or water transformed the mixture into smooth, bubbling perfection. The patties returned to simmer until they absorbed every bit of flavor. The gravy thickened while the meat remained juicy, creating a skillet meal worthy of any diner window. Frozen peas on the side added color and nutrition, while mashed potatoes, boxed or scratch-made, completed this satisfying plate. This wasn't pretentious steakhouse fare. It was honest, filling comfort food that felt special, even midweek. Leftovers made outstanding sandwiches the next day, with extra gravy spread like decadent mayo. Bread soup. Stale bread never went to waste. Day-old or even week-old bread formed the foundation of this filling soup. Chunks of hard bread soaked in hot water or thin broth until soft, then seasoned with whatever was on hand, maybe garlic, salt, pepper, or dried herbs from the garden. A drizzle of olive oil for Italian families or lard for others added necessary calories. The soup filled stomachs on nights when the pantry was nearly bare, teaching children that even the simplest ingredients could become a meal with enough creativity. Immigrant families often brought this tradition from their homelands, with each culture having its own variation. Papa al pomodoro in Italian households or sopa de ajo in Spanish homes. The transformation of hard, seemingly inedible bread into something warm and comforting represented the resilience of those who refused to be defeated by poverty. Women would trade secret ingredients between neighbors, creating community bonds through shared survival techniques that crossed cultural boundaries. Browned neck bones with rice. Never first choice, but often smartest, affordable, flavorful, and sold in quantity. Pork neck bones formed foundations for countless home-cooked meals, filling plates and satisfying hungry families. Initially browned in hot oil until fat crisped and enticing aromas filled kitchens. Chopped onions joined next, sizzling in flavorful drippings, capturing every browned bit from the pan. Water or broth followed, deglazing and creating simmering liquid for low, slow cooking. Gradually, meat softened and separated from bones, while liquid reduced into silky, savory gravy. Some cooks incorporated flour or cornstarch for body. Others preferred natural reduction. The resulting gravy alone justified patience. Poured over fluffy rice, it transformed simple ingredients into memorable meals. Accompanied by biscuits, greens, or plain white bread, dinner reached completion. This dish embodied resourceful cooking, transforming overlooked cuts into satisfying, nutritious meals through patience and technique. The contrast between the rich, gelatinous meat and the fluffy rice created perfect textural balance, while the deeply flavored gravy unified all elements. This represented working-class cooking at its most ingenious, finding value and flavor in cuts others overlooked. Egg gravy. When a family had chickens, eggs became precious protein sources. Egg gravy stretched 1 or 2 eggs to feed several mouths. Fat heated in a pan saved bacon grease or lard. Flour stirred in to make a roux, then water or milk added to create a gravy. Eggs beaten and stirred into the hot, but not boiling gravy, cooked in threads throughout, carrying egg flavor through the entire dish. Poured over biscuits or bread, the meal satisfied hunger, while making minimal ingredients feed maximum people. The timing of adding eggs to the gravy required skill, with too much heat creating scrambled bits instead of delicate threads throughout the sauce. Many families kept chickens specifically for this purpose, the morning egg collection determining whether egg gravy would appear on the table that day. Children would count the yolks visible in the gravy, hoping to spot evidence of their eggs' contribution to the family meal, creating a connection between the chores of chicken care and the food that sustained them. They remind us that good food isn't always about exotic ingredients or elaborate preparations. Sometimes it's about making the most of what you have, finding comfort in simplicity, and sharing what little is available with those you love. Next time your grocery budget feels tight, instead of reaching for expensive ingredients, consider these forgotten classics.